This is a tutorial on how to use a calculator to graph data that is given in a table. So let's start with our first example. So here we have a table that gives a correlation between the temperature in degrees Celsius and the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. So for example, when the temperature is 0 degrees Celsius, it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and so on throughout the rest of the table. So when we're looking at this table, we could think of the temperature in degrees Celsius as our input, and then the degrees Fahrenheit as our output. Now normally, if we were to graph this by hand, we would take each of these points individually and plot them onto a coordinate plane, making a scatter plot. Well, instead of doing it by hand, let's instead do it on the calculator. So to do that, we go to this button called Stat. And then the very first option under the Edit tab is Edit. So when we go to that, we have an option of different lists here. They're all labeled L1 through 6. Now by default, L1 is the list for our input values, and L2 is our list for the output values. So under L1, we want to put in all our input values, which is the temperature in degrees Celsius. So we'll put in 0, and then hit enter, and then put in the next value, 10, and hit enter, and then just keep doing that until we have all of our input values into this first list. And then once we're done with that, we could go over to L2 and put in our output values, or in other words, the temperatures in degrees Fahrenheit. So we'll first put in 32, because that corresponds to our input value of 0, and then we'll put in 50, and then continue on until we have all the corresponding output values. Now once we've done that, we need to set up our plot. So if you notice up here, above the y equals, in blue we have the words stat plot. Well, that's where we need to go to configure our graph. So if you notice, on all of our options here it says plot off. Plot 1 off, plot 2 off. Those are just various plots you can assign for your data. Well, we could just go to the first one, and we'll turn it on by hitting enter on on. Now here, the next option is there's a few different types of graphs we could do. Well, for us, we just want to stick to a scatter plot, which is the default option on the calculator. So we could just leave it how it is. Now as well, here it has XList and YList. Well, XList is referring to our input, and YList is referring to our output. Now as you can see, they're defaulted on L1 and L2, exactly how we put them into our data table already. Now right here, this is just an indicator for what each point is going to look like on the graph. So we'll just keep it as this open square here. It'll be easy to see. So now that we've done that, we could hit graph. Now right now you may notice that we can't see it very well, and that's because it's out of our window range. Well, what's nice about using a stat plot is that there's a very specific zoom for it. So we could go to our zoom button, and option number 9 is called zoom stat. Now what this does is it takes all of the points that we put into our lists and puts them into a window where we could see all of them. So when we hit enter, we could see all 5 of our points from our table. Now that we know how to do that, let's take a look at one more example. This time we have a table that shows the monthly utility cost for a household. Now let's put this data into our lists so we could graph it. So we'll go back to stat. Now we still have our old data in these lists, but we could clear them out pretty quickly. And to do that, we just need to highlight the list. So for example, L2, and then hit clear, and then enter. And it deletes every entry in that list. So the same thing with L1. If we want to clear all the entries in that list, we highlight L1, and then hit clear, and then enter. And now that list is cleared as well. Now let's put in our new information into these lists. So first we want our inputs into L1. Well, in this case, our inputs are actually the various months. And we can't just put in January, February, March, and so on. In the calculator, we have to put actual numerical values. So since there's 12 months in a year, let's just use 1 through 12, corresponding to the 12 different months. So for January, we'll put in 1, and then February we'll put in 2, and then we'll put in the rest of the numbers until we have all 12 months. So now that we've done that, we could go to L2 and put in our various utility costs for those months. So in January, we had $132. February, we had $154. And then keep filling out the rest of the table the same way until you have it completely filled. Alright, so now that we have all of our data into the lists, let's go to our stat plot. So we'll hit second, y equals, hit enter, make sure everything's still good, so it's turned on and it's on scatter. And then we have our inputs and outputs on L1 and L2. So now we could graph it. Now at the moment, we're in our old window from our previous data. So in order to change it again for these particular points, we could do zoom stat again. So we'll do zoom, and then we could go over to option 9 for zoom stat, and then hit enter. Now it puts all of our new points into a window to where we could see them all pretty clearly. And that's how you use your calculator to graph data from a table.